we can't force you to join the guild. That's against labor law. It used to be that they had what they called closed shop unions, where if you wanted to work in that place, you had to join a union. But some workers found that onerous or offensive, and there are laws that prevent that, and of course, a political administration that is not favorably disposed toward labor will encourage laws that don't require a union shop. However, because we have a fairly cohesive industry where the unions and the companies understand the value of working together, we have an agreement that if you're going to work for a signatory company, a company that has agreed to abide by the union rules, after a period of time, you should, in fact, have to join the union. Now, you can't be forced to join the union if that's not your choice. You can be what they call in labor a free rider. You can get the benefit of the hard work and organization and strikes that have come before you to get you a minimum wage and not have to pay anything for it. But the right thing to do is to contribute to the welfare of the organization that got you decent working conditions and living wage. Now, it sounds funny in our business where wages far exceed what labor gets in fields and factories, but it doesn't change the fact that you are working, you're performing labor for an entity that's going to profit from your labor, and it's only fair that you be compensated for it. And what that compensation is where reasonable people can disagree. But before unions, writers were abused. And a perfect example is the first Writers Guild contract, the first contract that the studios entered into with writers. Had very few pages, and it basically had a minimum wage for writers who had to go to an office and write every day, and the right for writers to determine for themselves what the correct credit for that writing was, so that the producer's boyfriend couldn't get a credit just for being there. They'd have to actually write something, and that writing had to be presented to some experienced people who could look at it and say, yes, this person contributed, put their name on the script. Or no, this person did not contribute enough, so no need to put their name on the script. And again, reasonable people can disagree. I think there should be a list of participating writers on every project, even if they don't qualify for a written by credit. They certainly qualify for a credit down in the crawl, along with the hairdresser and the dialogue coach and the star's assistant who cleans out their trailer. So if they get a credit, why shouldn't a writer who worked on the script, even for a week, not
I'll
get a
give
credit?
you an interesting scenario. This is maybe a bit of a dogleg, but given your history as an improviser, one of the things that you may be aware of, and I know that he has petitioned for this unsuccessfully, is that Christopher Guest, because all of his films are improvisational, he wants to credit all of those improvisers as writers and has been unable to get them accorded that credit.
Within the halls of the Writers Guild, I have echoed that argument. I've never won that argument. There is a class of writer who believes in this, the sanctity and the primacy of writers, and that all works should have an author. Now, it can be a team. It can even be several teams. And in the case of Spinal Tap, in every movie that Chris Guest has ever made, that team consists of the cast.
Right.
And to my way of thinking, they are the authors of that film along with the director and should be credited as writers. And it's to me, it's sad that they're not. And
So you are sympathetic to the plight of the improviser.
oh God, yes, because I've seen it in action, and I was offended that Spinal Tap didn't get the actors in Spinal Tap didn't get writing credit.
Well, Chris has said to me that he has tried to take up this cause, I think, on every single one of his films.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I guess the problem within the halls of the guild
Mm-hmm.
is that in the history of the movie industry and television is that material is written and then performed. There's no acknowledgement of the improvisational process.
Right. So, just a couple of WGA related questions then. As you entered the guild some 50 years ago now, how have you seen the guild evolve in ways that are good and should be acknowledged, and in what ways do you feel that they still have a distance to go to get to where you think they need to be?
Where they have failed is that they have bought into the writerly concept that all works have authors, and that authors are artists of primary creation and have to be acknowledged and compensated as such.
Mm-hmm.
Without a script, there's nothing. The person who creates that script is the author of that script. Now I think if you scratch a screenwriter, you'll find a frustrated novelist.
Mm-hmm.
And in the history of narrative, novels, are generally by one person,
Mm-hmm.
very rarely by two, except nowadays, for economic purposes, by name author and journeyman writer together because the name author is too busy or too dead to write a sequel. But for the most part, they are stuck in this notion that a screenplay or a teleplay is like a novel. It has an author,
Mm-hmm.
and that person should get credit because in the past they were denied those credits, and those credits were unfairly awarded. So I understand their position. But in film and television, which are essentially collaborative mediums, all the parties to the collaboration ought to be recognized, especially in the case of authorship, where the work of those people is the foundation upon which all the other collaborators build. There are only two. There's two kinds of creation, two kinds of artists. There are artists of original creation, and there are artists of interpretation. Artists of original, in the film and television business, the only artist of original creation is the writer and the composer. Everybody else is an artist of interpretation, including the director. Like the conductor of an orchestra, best conductor in the world ain't Mozart. Mozart is Mozart. He wrote that stuff. The conductor interprets it. The musicians play it. Actors say the lines, they don't create the lines. They create the characters, but that's a really fuzzy area, but it's self-defining. If the actor says the words, plays the character, well, then that actor is a character. It's obvious. It's not obvious when the actor improvises his or her lines that they are also writing. And the Guild should recognize that, and doesn't, and I'm sorry that they don't. And ask Chris Guest to see me, and we'll figure out an approach. In the last 50 years, the Guild, I think, has fulfilled its mission to protect the creators of original material and even the creators of adapted material. And there are some cumbersome mechanisms for that, including arbitration of screen credits, which, like Churchill said about democracy, is the worst of all systems except for all the others. The Guild has figured out how to attribute authorship if authorship must be attributed. And I think we'll all agree that things don't write themselves. Somebody creates it, and that person should be recognized. And movies aren't novels. They're not written by one. They don't come to the screen because one person did it. The only person who can claim legitimately a film by credit is an animator who writes the story, creates the character, draws every frame of it by hand, and photographs it, and makes it work. That's a film by. Everybody else in the film business is an artist of interpretation. Writers are artists of original creation.